Boom to the hay, all you sports fans out there in the tubosphere. To you, the individual, as part of the collective. Welcome to Fast Track Sports Rack. That's your on-talk radio version of the OMSR. I am, as always, your brief but concise host, Will, the alternative ESPN Sports Thrill, bringing you yet another Let's Turn Up the Tension episode, college football summer news. Been calling it spring for a little too long. And this particular episode, briefly and concisely, the SEC Media Days, with the focus on Auburn and Nick Marshall's arrest. And will head coach Malzahn lower the boom on him or not? It's really not that big of a deal. Quickie sport rant of the segment's going to be about what's really meant by the phrase, you gotta be smarter than that. Because there's some things sort of understood between the lines here. Certain levels of acceptable, don't see, don't tell, or don't ask, don't tell. Although that harkens back to something else. I'm just saying, it's not like he's the only one who ever does this. So at what point do you call it, you got to make a smarter decision than that, right? What is meant by that phrase? In the meantime, roll clips.
Football Live, coming to you from the Hyatt Regency Winfrey Hotel in Hoover, where Radio Row has over 30 stations all week long for SEC Media Days, where you go up one level and the conference room is packed with over 1,300 credentialed media. They heard Mike Slide with his opening remarks. And then you go down to the lobby, and the lobby workers, WDE, War Eagle was heard for most of the midday here in Hoover, Alabama, as we say hello. Joe Tessitore alongside Danny Cannell and Jesse Palmer. Welcome to the unofficial start of the college football season. Glad to be here.
He misses World Cup already, but I'm glad we got some football.
You know it's big time.
Gone. Football here.
Joe Tess on the set.
That's right.
You know it's bad.
Welcome back. From now until January 12th, here we go. The big story today. People are saying, oh, there's no big story without Manziel. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, the returning starting quarterback of the SEC champions cited for marijuana possession, Auburn quarterback Nick Marshall. He was on the invitee list. He was pulled out, staying at home. Head coach Gus Malzahn making that decision. Here's what Malzahn had to say today at SEC Media Days 2014.
It is a privilege and a reward to represent Auburn here at the SEC Media Day. Last Friday, Nick lost that privilege. We have high expectations for our players, but specifically our quarterback, being the face of our program. Up until last Friday, Nick has been a model student, teammate, and citizen. Nick made a mistake, and he'll have to deal with the consequences. I'm not ready to say what those consequences are at this time, but he will deal with it.
So non-committal in terms of discipline for his starting quarterback was Gus Malzahn, but this viewed as a privilege, he says. He's really shielding him, many say, from what would have been a very taxing day of the media asking Nick Marshall certain questions. Start with you, Danny. Was this the correct call by Gus Malzahn to not bring him to Hoover, Alabama?
I think it was. I'm not buying what he's selling, though. I'm not believing that he's punishing him by not allowing him there. I mean, you ask Jesse, former players, you do not enjoy this day. As much as we love it, we get to talk about football, you don't like getting peppered, having to answer the same question over and over. I think he was protecting Nick Marshall from the criticism, the type of questions he would have been hassled by all afternoon, and he would have kept continually having to say no comment, no comment. I think it was the smart thing for him to do. Let this news cycle we live in, there's so much, instant analysis. People want to answer it right away. It'll quiet down. He'll be able to answer it later when there's not so much scrutiny on him like there is today. So I think it was the right choice.
It was the right move by Gus Malzahn, as you said, to protect his young quarterback. Guys, look behind you. It is a zoo here at SEC Media Days. It is a media frenzy, and I don't think Nick Marshall would have survived this day. It's funny. You think back to last year. Kevin Sumlin sends Johnny Manziel, quote-unquote, to the Wolves after he had a lot of issues off the field in the offseason to deal with the media. media. There was a huge difference, though. Johnny Manziel had media savvy. After winning the Heisman Trophy, he had been on tour. The paparazzi were following. He loved that type of atmosphere. You consider how fresh this is for Nick Marshall. Just happened this past weekend in this state where Auburn is. All of the questions today would not have been about leading your team back to a national championship game. Can you compete for the Heisman Trophy? It would have been about the poor decisions he's made off the field. It was the right idea, I think, for Gus Malzahn to protect him. Nick Marshall can answer these questions in training camp in his own backyard.
He's a veteran coach. He knows what to answer. He kept drilling. He gave him, the stare back. I'm not giving you anything more. You're not so sure, Nick Marshall, how he's going to handle that over and over. How many times can he keep saying no comment or giving you an answer that's really giving you nothing?
Let's dig a little deeper into the Nick Marshall backstory here, because this is really his second chance at the SEC. Remember, he started his career at Georgia. He had missteps there. The details are well published online. Goes off to junior college, changes positions, emerges at a prospect as a quarterback. A year ago right now, he wasn't even on Auburn's campus. One of the great stories of college football the past year. Now high expectations heading in. Concerns with Nick Marshall.
You have to be concerned if you're head coach Gus Malzahn at the lack of leadership that your quarterback is demonstrating. The leader of your football team. It's simply unacceptable, guys. You got to make the right decisions both on the field and off the field as well. You just mentioned the issues he had at Georgia. Kicked off the team for allegedly stealing money. And I understand 17 to 22-year-olds, they make mistakes. You cannot have marijuana in your car. Everybody knows that. Was Nick Marshall a breakout player last year? Yes. Can he lead his team back to a national championship this year? Absolutely. Now I'm very curious to find out what would be the suspension when you consider they play a huge divisional opponent in Arkansas week 1 at home. This will be interesting to watch.
What would you expect, Danny, in terms of discipline?
You have to hold a higher standard. You mentioned being the quarterback. I mean, he's the returner. He's the guy that was supposed to have the spotlight on him here. You have to hold him to a higher standard. I think the average person at home would be absolutely astounded if they knew how many players probably had a little bit of marijuana in their car, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't make it any more right or wrong. You've got to be smarter than that in the decisions you're making, especially with the second chance you've been given like Nick Marshall has.
Well, consider the offense last year. Just superb, led the nation rushing, brought them to the BCS title game, and now so many complement parts are back. It raises the question, could the Auburn offense actually even be better this year? They get the #1 JUCO recruit in the country, Duke Williams, the wide receiver. Now he bookends Sammy Coates. Yes, you lose a Heisman finalist at running back. There's still plenty of talent surrounding Nick Marshall and the offensive line as well.
It could be better, and it's scary, but the key is Nick Marshall coming back, guys. This is the first time in Gus Malzahn's 9 years of coaching in college he's had his starting quarterback come back for a second consecutive season. Never happened before, so that is huge for the development in this offense, the continuity in this offense. He's got to become a better passer. Can't miss wide open touchdown throws against Alabama and Florida State late in the year. But guys, it's a rushing offense. I think the goal here is to throw the ball between 35 to 40% of the time as opposed to 20% last year. And you mentioned a lot of talent still coming back around him at those skill positions and up front on the offensive line.
The little graphic we just showed, beautiful. Rushing stats are great. Passing, not so much. 109th in the country. And a lot of this is why it's important that we're talking about Nick Marshall off the field, but on the field, he is equally as important. He has to improve. If this Auburn offense wants to get better, it's going to revolve around him. I think they'll manage to fill Trey Mason's shoes. I don't think you're going to have quite a dynamic as back, but somewhere back there, Cameron Artis-Payne maybe, they'll get production from that position. Nick Marshall can run the ball himself, so he's going to provide that dynamic, but it's got to come. The passing game has to improve so they're not so one-sided. In this offense, too, he completed 59% of his passes last year. You would expect in Gus Malzahn's offense that success rate would be closer to 70%. So, he needs to vastly improve accuracy and making those simple throws, because this offense is built around getting guys wide open. You have to hit them.
It's a running offense still. You mentioned some of those pieces in the backfield right now. Rock Thomas, a big 5-star recruit coming out of high school. Cameron Artis-Payne, a guy to watch out for. Curtis Grant, a guy last year led the nation with 9.8 yards rushing, did a lot of it on jet sweeps. He's been clocked at a sub 4.2 in the 40. I don't know if I necessarily believe that, but the big question mark is they want to see, can this be a guy that carries the football in between the tackles? Again, everything this offense does is predicated on running the football. Curtis Grant, a name to watch.
Right. Some good stuff going on there. By the way, from day one, SEC Media Days will be a quicker segment, but the commissioner of the SEC talking about I'm not going to go off and say secession because we're talking about a conference in the South. No, I'm not going there. I'm sure somebody somewhere is going to make the mistake or has already done so, this being after the fact of day one of SEC Media Days. But just this notion of going off on your own from the NCAA, well, maybe that's not such a bad idea. All right, quickie sport rant. You know, there's one of two, well, let's call it one of three things going on in terms of extracurricular stuff, quote unquote, right? In the college scene. Lots of alcohol, a little bit of hooba, or some of the zippity in its various forms. Be it ecstasy, e-corda borda, or the istal methyl. So, when you're talking about hooba, a lot of guys are going to have a puff here and there. What's meant in the phrase by you got to be smarter than that? If you're going to take it in your car, don't get pulled over, right? If you're going to have stuff like that in your car, you better drive like grandmama. Or make sure your car is nothing wrong with it, there's no probable cause for getting pulled over. To which these other things are found on the side, in addition to the traffic stop that got you stopped in the first place. Otherwise, I think it's sort of like there's a minimal acceptable standard as to what people in general at the college level are going to dabble in, experiment in, as long as they don't get carried away, right? It would be the same case if you got a DUI and you're found to be twice the legal limit. And alcohol's legal. So there's all sorts of minimal acceptable standards of behavior, as long as nobody finds out about it, and as long as you're aware that, you know, at a certain point you've got to like have some self-control and say, okay, I've gone far enough. Now trust me, OMSR, you know, a lot of you 20-something dudes who watch this show, because you might have missed, you know, stuff going on ESPN, hence the moniker, Alternative ESPN Sports Field, give you a nice alternative, don't take too much from any one source, make it more targeted, split it up into a couple of different shows, what have you. Being a generation or so older than you guys, being in our young 40s, we know from experience, because we've all done it. Certainly on the alcohol side of things, I've tied one on back in the day, and I'll leave it at that. Gotta watch yourself, because those can lead into bad habits as you get older and you become an addict. All the video highlights courtesy to ESPN and ACC Media Days, everything else to the OMSR. Okay, that's it. Thanks for watching, and as I always like to close and remind y'all out there, no silly DUIs while you're out there celebrating whatever it is you're doing at this time of year. Not too many sports left other than baseball. We are later out of here.